Thank you for joining us this morning on The Real Story. I'm Emma Wulfhorst. Nearly 44,000 Palestinians have been killed in the ongoing war in Gaza. The majority reported to be women and children, and even more casualties are being counted in the region, and Israeli forces continue to expand into Lebanon, Syria, and Iran. This past week, controversial Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ousted Israel's defense minister after he told family members of the Israeli hostages the IDF had achieved all of its objectives in Gaza, and said Netanyahu himself was responsible for holding up a ceasefire deal. We get a chance to speak with Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro, a ranking member on House Appropriations, about her most recent meeting with the Israeli Prime Minister. She was there on a short bipartisan delegation trip, part of a larger tour within the Middle East.
The visits are important. It's important to know where the moderate Arab states are, what they're thinking, what they want to do, what kind of assistance they will support. And as you probably know, Egypt and Qatar have been deeply involved in trying to form a ceasefire. It's not only what appears in the newspapers, it's the back channel diplomacy, which usually is responsible for getting us to where we want to go.
As part of the committee that controls the purse strings in Congress, DeLauro's trip in Israel undoubtedly covered aid asks. Netanyahu is keen on the expansion into other regions and targeting other terrorist groups and proxies, meaning a growing war and more money requested. But pressure from the American people to place conditions on aid or altogether embargo weapon transfers to Israel has only gotten greater. Congresswoman DeLauro did not attend Netanyahu's congressional address this past summer and has spoken out against him, but by record supports Israel and American aid to their objectives in Gaza and beyond the Strip.
While we were there, Sinwar of Hamas was killed, and I support that effort because, again, for security purposes, and I understand the Israeli interest in moving Hezbollah north of the Litani River, again, so that those people who have been displaced from the north could go back to their homes. Having said that, I think we are now at the time where we need to take these military victories and turn them into political successes. And that means that we should have an immediate ceasefire, that we should, free the hostages, and deal with regional stability, and move in the direction of looking toward a Palestinian state in the future. We need massive quantities of humanitarian assistance that need to get to Gaza. We can't, the killing of civilians who are not part of either Hamas or Hezbollah has to be addressed very, very substantially. I'm very disappointed, and I spoke out about, and I oppose the decision to ban the UN Relief Works Agency, UNRWA, because they are indispensable in trying to maintain a stability, particularly in the West Bank. I think they moved expeditiously to remove those folks who were found to be engaged in the October 7th massacre, and it was a massacre.
Worldwide leaders and experts say specifically the North may already be in famine as those trucks there remain without food shipments, clean water, and often without any electricity or connection. The 30-day ultimatum issued by the Biden administration to greatly expand humanitarian assistance on the Strip ran out this past week. International aid groups on the ground in Gaza, including Connecticut's own Save the Children, have said Israel has ignored the deadline. warning. Despite the evidence President Biden announced in the White House with the Israeli president, he wouldn't actually limit weapon transfers. The U.S. wanted 350 trucks entering Gaza. Israel claims they've managed to get 75. Even that is being questioned by the global community, though. It's not the first time world powers, the U.S. has ignored a humanitarian crisis. Even those in the Biden administration have been publicly resigning over the policy for this war. We spoke exclusively with one of them, Hala Rharrit, a former diplomat. For 18 years, she worked in the U.S. Department of State, eventually as a spokesperson for the government. She resigned, though, back in April, saying the atrocities in Gaza and American funding were making it, quote, impossible to promote the U.S. She claims U.S. policy is destabilizing the region altogether and not even making Israel any safer, all while avoiding apparent evidence of war crimes against Palestinians.
Throughout the career, there were always ups and downs, but I never, ever experienced the situation that I experienced that we're undergoing now and we're all watching happening unfold in the Middle East. But fundamentally for me, when I became a diplomat, like all other diplomats, I swore an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And it's exactly because of that oath that I had to resign and speak out, because we're in full violation of our laws. And I'm not just talking about international law, which everybody speaks of, international humanitarian law. That is absolutely obvious. But I'm talking about American laws like Leahy Vetting, Arms Export Control Act, Foreign Assistance Act, that all of your viewers right here in Connecticut can Google for themselves and study. And as someone who was a diplomat and who believes in the rule of law and who believes in our country abiding by our own laws, I couldn't sit by and be a part of that crime. And that's what it is. And seeing fellow diplomats, to be quite frank, be silenced as well, be told that they needed to implement this policy no matter what, it sends such a chilling effect across the department, the likes of which I've never seen. So now you have diplomats and other experts throughout the interagency censoring themselves because they understand that if they bring up concerns about the legality of the policy, about the inhumanity of the policy, about the fact that it is actually quite a failed policy, it has not achieved any of its objectives, it's not keeping Israel any safer, it hasn't achieve the release of the hostages who deserve to be home with their families. And obviously, it is absolutely devastating to the Palestinians. When experts in the US government are forced to censor themselves because they are afraid of retribution, we all lose as Americans. The decisions are not being made based on rational policy making of what's good for America. It's made based on what's good for the politicians.
Some on the Hill have started conversations about the federal government's support for Israel without condition. It's what supposedly led to the ultimatum, although that wasn't upheld. The U.S. actually doesn't have a mutual defense pact with Israel, but as we were the first country to recognize the Jewish state in 1948, we've continued to be strong and steady supporters. Israel is now a major non-NATO ally, allowing them privileged access to the most advanced U.S. military platforms and technologies. Israel is a long-time leading buyer of U.S. weapon systems through arms sales. Connecticut's aerospace industry, specifically Pratt & Whitney, is also the only company to produce the engine used to power Israel's F-35 fighter jets. While the IDF remains a major part of our country and Connecticut's defense industry, Israeli interest remains a power in American campaigns and congressional chambers.
We morally cannot support people who are committing genocide, and our government and our elected officials, we see them as all actually committing this genocide themselves. They are not anymore enabling it or aiding it or providing. They are providing the money, the intelligence, the troops on the ground.
Connecticut has a long tradition of, supplying our military, going back really to George Washington. Absolutely. And I think actually it's a proud tradition. In my opinion, the policy that the U.S. has pursued there is about sort of protecting sovereignty of nations, providing defensive equipment, Iron Dome equipment that, again, is really about, trying to protect a population from what happened on October 7th. When the time comes where I think the two main adversaries realize that that pathway of fighting is just exhausted, that's when I think the diplomatic effort's going to step in and create a framework for an exchange of prisoners and at least a relatively sustainable period of peace.
For decades, the U.S. have provided the cover for the Israeli occupation in Palestine, providing endless money support, whether it's money or aid or or technology. This has not ever been possible to Israel without the American support, whether it's political cover or military assistance.
It is absolutely devastating to have served my country for 18 years and then see my government, especially this administration, dehumanize an entire population, dehumanize to the extent of being able to exterminate them. And I just want to be clear to you, your viewers, that that is actually what is happening right now. We may not be seeing it here in the United States, but I see it. I'm still focused on what is happening in Gaza. And if you actually want to see it, everybody can, because it's being live streamed on the internet. It's just a matter of what you allow yourself to be exposed to. And so we can't do that to each other as human beings. It doesn't keep anyone safe.
As I said, I believe Israel has the right to defend itself. I support their actions in Iran, but there also needs to be some indication we will move in the future to a two-state solution, to a Palestinian a state. And we need now to get that humanitarian assistance into Gaza as quickly as we possibly can, without interruption and without any kinds of impediments.
I can unequivocally say that the State Department knows that war crimes are being committed in Gaza. I wrote daily reports to Washington, and my reports got to, I was told many times, the most senior levels of our government, including in the State Department, including in the White House. And what those reports documented was what was happening in Gaza as covered by the pan-Arab traditional and social media. But those reports showed the devastation of Gaza. Every single day, I would write them on weekends, and I would stay up late at night consolidating all of the facts and all of the information. And oftentimes, that would show U.S. complicity, because it would show U.S. fragments, fragments of U.S. bombs next to children, literally children massacred, or other images of children being completely starved, skin and bones, babies, because Israel was not allowing humanitarian assistance in. Now, let me tell you why those two things are significant. Going back to the law argument, Leahy vetting, one of our laws, states that the United States is not authorized to send military assistance to countries whose units, or to military units that commit gross human rights violations. There has been undisputed evidence that Israeli defense units are committing gross human rights violations in Gaza. It is not me, it is international organizations. It's a unanimous agreement and proof. Yet we're still sending military assistance. The second thing that I said was about the emaciated children that are starving to death. Another one of our laws, the Foreign Assistance Act, stipulates any country that prohibits humanitarian assistance from going to people in need is also not authorized to receive military assistance. We have proof. And another person that resigned, Stacey Gilbert, was one of the subject matter experts that wrote how Israel is systematically withholding humanitarian assistance from the people of Gaza to the point that they are starving to death and they are dying of preventable diseases. I'm talking about the civilians. When it got to the political level, at the Secretary Blinken's level on our U.S. ambassador to Israel, they changed the facts before it went to Congress in order to willfully bypass these laws. So it's a willful violation of these laws in order to continue surging weapons to the state of Israel. And I want to stress, this is not keeping Israel any safer. And I've been in touch with many Israeli peace activists who beg me as an American citizen, please tell your government to stop empowering Netanyahu because he is making everyone unsafe and destabilizing the entire region.
This brings us to the historic congressional vote set for this upcoming week. The U.S. Senate will call resolutions which could potentially block more weapon transfers and aid to Israel. Just weeks after the tragedy at the Nova Music Festival, where Hamas killed and took many people hostage, the chamber voted on a resolution simply stating they unequivocally stood with Israel against terrorism. Now, with the climbing civilian death toll and the evidence diplomats like Rharrit were asked to delete, it's brought the Senate to a place of voting to potentially embargo Israel. We don't have word on how Connecticut senators plan to vote, although Senator Chris Murphy's office has received a petition supporting a stop to aid with hundreds of signatures from Connecticut's Jewish Voices for Peace and other organizations.
Congressional lawmakers are the ones who decide whether or not Israel gets those weapons, right? They have to approve it. The State Department sometimes does tricks where they do a shipment that's just under the congressional oversight amount. And that's, again, another willful violation and tricks of loopholes in the laws. But for large part, any military assistance that goes to Israel needs to go through congressional approval. It needs to go through a vote. And I'm going to be very blunt because now I've resigned from my office as a diplomat. I can be very blunt. The reality right now is that our politicians are not making those decisions of whether or not to send those weapons to Israel based on whether that's good for U.S. national security. They're making it based on who funds them, who are their donors. It's not what's good for America. It's not even what's good for Israeli citizen security. It's who's going to get them reelected. I've said this in Washington, and I'm getting in trouble for saying it so loudly, but I'm not just talking about AIPAC. AIPAC is one thing, and AIPAC is very well known, and what they do in terms of trying to elect and unseat representatives is well clear. But I'm also talking about the arms industry, which is quite powerful in this state. And so when you have the influence of the arms industry combined with the pro-Israel Zionist lobby, those two combinations are quite lethal. And so now you have lawmakers making decisions strictly based on that. And that is dangerous because that goes back to my original point of you have your experts being silenced, you have your experts being sidelined. So we as career diplomats now are forced to implement what these lawmakers are agreeing to. And the result is a willful violation of the law. The reason why Netanyahu keeps going back on deals that were agreed to is because he has no reason to agree to a ceasefire. He has no reason to release the hostages. He's willfully sacrificing the hostages, and the families know that and realize that. That's why they're protesting against him, because his goal is not to stop the war. And we are not allowing him. We are allowing him to get away with it because we're not using our leverage. We keep sending him more weapons.
As the frustration builds and Congress is back in session on Capitol Hill, we have more of our exclusive conversations with Rharrit, concerned constituents, and lawmakers themselves. We're digging in deeper to the historic upcoming vote, which could embargo Israel and change the United States relationship, plus how the tragically recorded civilian loss in Palestine impacted this election cycle here and nationwide. That's coming up. Thanks for staying with us here on The Real Story. We're continuing our special coverage of the expanding war in the Middle East. Especially, we're talking about post this recent election and ahead of an unheard vote where senators will decide whether to block more weapons and aid to our country's non-official but long-standing ally, Israel. Public support for the war continues to falter in Israel itself and among Americans, no matter their political background or party.
It's inexcusable. It's horrifying. It's inhumane and it's illegal. And what I hope for us as American citizens is that we hold our politicians to account.
We spoke with Rharrit after she shared her insight on the legalities and practices in government at a meeting here in Connecticut with local advocates we've spoken to from the Arab American and Muslim community, Jewish faith, and more, hoping to empower constituents to keep at Congress.
We are concerned Connecticut citizens who decided to take action, and that includes people like from all walks of life, people who are Christians and Jews and others.
They all hoped election season and campaign outreach would be the perfect opportunity to finally feel heard.
To this day, we made more than 23,000 calls to elected officials in Connecticut. We've exhausted, our all activism tools, that like calling them and protesting and trying to meet with them. And now our vote is our most important tool that's left in our hands.
This election, all of Connecticut's lawmakers attempted to toe the line when it came to Israel and Palestine. Every single one on the trail and on the debate stage supported the war, but also called for humanitarian relief. Some have brought up conditions on aid to Israel. Others support a two-state solution once stability is reached. But as the unstable crisis continues to worsen and America sends billions more dollars to Israel, along with military aid, Connecticut's entire delegation was reelected. Now they'll have to vote in the coming weeks on whether to restrict further support and possibly put those funds to work elsewhere.
For us to just decide that we're going to choose between the two lesser evil is not fair anymore to anyone. It's not fair to the American people who deserve better education system, better healthcare system, better transportation, housing, and infrastructure, you name it. Our country suffers from so many, on so many levels. And instead of using this money to support the American people, you are sending it to a genocide. And we have every right to seek alternatives and to actually have the people who in office who align with our values and our plans and our aspirations.
After I resigned from the State Department, I went to Congress. I held a lot of advocacy meetings with members of Congress, and everyone is very open about the fact that we're in violation of these laws. It was shocking to me. But the forces of elections are so great. That is what is driving it. I know the Middle East is far away, but the same reason why we keep on having gun violence in high schools year after year after year, where our students keep getting shot at in high schools, because the gun lobby is so powerful in this country that we're not able to change the laws, is the exact same reason why we keep sending weapons to Israel when it does not benefit anyone at all, when everyone is failing from this policy. Does it serve us as Americans, or does it actually serve special interests and the arms industry? And I'm just going to say, for example, our Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, before he became Secretary of Defense, he was on the board for a subsidiary for Raytheon, the arms company.
Raytheon is part of Connecticut's deep defense industry here. Coming up on The Real Story, we'll actually be talking with those in that workforce, diving into its role in the Connecticut economy, speaking directly with the lawmakers sustaining it, and learning some new ideas of what so-called ethical defense industry might look like here. But back during the April primary, more than 7,600 registered Democrats in Connecticut voted uncommitted for the presidential candidate, about 11% of overall turnout. We saw many from that historic movement vote outside of the major parties in the general election, too.
We're trying to fight another country's battles. We're here. We're not in Palestine, and yet we're so heavily involved in Palestine and Israel's interactions. Right now, with everything that we've been doing, we haven't really seen change. If anything, things in Connecticut have not been getting better. There's room for improvement, and you have to give the independent voice a chance, because we're in the middle. We work with both sides in a sense.
Despite being a politically blue state, Connecticut's largest voting bloc is actually unaffiliated and independent. Many politicians and activists alike have warned them continuously not to quote-unquote split the vote. Many told us, though, they couldn't fathom bubbling in any of the major party candidates on their ballot because of Gaza, the Middle East, and for the U.S.'s own challenges.
Republicans and Democrats alike have failed this country, have failed to recognize and to accept that the people actually want to see change in all levels, in whether it's domestic or internationally, and they fail to listen to the majority of Americans who think that we want to stop the genocide, but we also want to see our country advancing in all aspects. We instead of trying to improve the American lives, both parties have been engaged in wars outside, pouring now billions of dollars in a genocide.
A lot of that money, if taken and actually reinvested in our communities, it can have the potential to make a lot of change. And it's not like we're talking about a couple $100,000s. It's a lot of money that's being sent overseas.
Some have blamed those who strayed from the major parties for the Democratic losses and shrinking margins this year. We took a look as part of our larger analysis, but the numbers don't add up. The portion of those who voted third party here and nationally is too small to make up the difference. Plus, 3 of Connecticut's U.S. House seats were actually won by the incumbent Democrats with larger margins than in 2022. Nonetheless, there was social and numeric momentum with this No Votes for Genocide in Gaza movement.
The American political system suffers from a disease, actually, that we think that I personally don't think that this is a democracy anymore when we only have 2 choices on the ballot in every office in the country. And not only that, we get to be even looked at as people who are threatening the security and the freedom or the democracy in the country, because we actually dare to dream or to vision a third party, or like maybe third and fourth and fifth party. This is what the democracy should look like.
There's still a question, though, of whether a third party candidate has any chance as you look further down the ballot. In the political analysis world, it's never looked good, but the conversation is undoubtedly happening now, especially as Democrats across the country ask what's next.
We have been so engaged with the tension between both parties and neglecting the American people and their needs. So I hope these politicians will go back and be sincere in their efforts to reach out to everyone.
That's all the time we have now on The Real Story this morning, but we'll have continuing coverage on air, online, and on the Free News app, especially of the upcoming votes. Stay informed and stay engaged.